Good afternoon. I'm Elaine Hall-Corbin, and welcome to Artist of Color. And I've got to say, before I introduce my guest, I'm actually give you a little bit about her. First of all, she is the Director of Education and Interpretation of the Museum of Afro-American History in Boston and Nantucket. She's an adjunct member at Pine Manor in Chestnut Hill and Bunker Community College. That's just a little bit. She's also served on the artistic community for 20 years as an award-winning national and international visual artist, performer, and poet with residencies in Brazil, Taiwan, Costa Rica, Africa, France, and Cuba. And I'm just going to leave it right there and want you to be happy for me, because I'm happy, to introduce my guest, Lamerche Frazier. Good afternoon, Lamerche, and I'm so glad you're here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm humbled by being invited to be here.
God, I don't even know where to begin.
We'll just begin.
I've known you for a number of years.
Yes.
You know, and I've seen much of your work. And your work and what you do is like phenomenal. Because every time I try to catch up with you, you've gone here, you've gone there, or you're just coming back. But hey, that's what amazing talent does, and that's what amazing people do.
Well,
and you're one of those amazing people. I have to say that.
Well, I just try to keep up with the rest of everybody else, and in the process, have one life work, whether it's the lectures, whether it's a visual art, whether it's convening with people and a job here, there, and abroad.
Right.
It's about save me from my amnesia, how we connect with people, how we have forgotten some of our connections, and how we are now trying to reconnect with each other. So I consider that a privilege to be an artist, to speak out loud, to work out loud, to be honored with the presence of other individuals on the planet who are engaged in some of this work for social justice, some of this work to unite our communities. So as a visual and performance artist, as a lecturer, I am always becoming, and especially in the area of history, looking at how that has impacted the world and what kind of visual images can help us to talk about this in discourse. So it is my privilege to be here to look at some of the work that I've been able to engender, and it's driven by human spirit, and the best of our connections hopefully can come through this fusion of art. That's the power of art, I think. And so, you know, the fact that you've been with this program and announcing the power of art all of this time is really commendable, so thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to ask a couple of personal questions.
Certainly, go ahead.
How long were you born and raised in Boston?
No, I wasn't.
I did not, I thought I'd ask that question. Where are you originally from?
Originally from Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh,
and
okay.
I was raised there, and my roots extend to a place called Christiansburg, Virginia, and where my mother was from.
Okay.
And some of her artistic prowess on me.
I know it
My
was.
grandfather was a tailor. She followed him around. She learned the crafts and art in a way that benefited functional use and utilitarian objects. She said, I don't do, I make beautiful things. And so from that beginning and that understanding of the world beyond us, that we can craft, that we can use these as a vehicle to talk with people. And she was always engaging with people. She took a crochet hook and needles.
I remember seeing her do that one day.
With her everywhere. And so it became a way to converse with people. And I grew up with that and began to sense that this has some value.
Yes.
And so I have looked at the study of political science and philosophy, and my understanding of some of that and continue to be a student in this world of politics and movement of man, but looked at the idea that we can converse in a non-threatening way through art with those subjects, and possibly in the space and territories that we would not normally be able to do with just words. And so it is a quest of mine to look at this journey very simply. I have now just about narrowed down in my multimedia experience as an artist to look at the creation of fiber,
Yes.
of creation of these artworks with fiber and nylon. It have come out of a growing experimental study of holography. Holograms, if you're not familiar with that, many of us have very small we can use this way, but yes, the study of stereograms extended my understanding of holograms and light. And so they became life-size, and I was in a project that I studied a course at Mass and MIT under Harriet Caston Silver, and we did a very public artwork that was seen by about 17,000 people of 5 life-size holograms, just opposed to 5 African-American photographers from the 19th century sharing the stories of children. And so with sound domes that were done by Brown Innovations, Kevin Brown from MIT, we were able to affect a conversation about children and their voices and in holography. Now, I don't know what you know about holography, but it's expensive. Okay. And I, as a fiber artist, tried to create a less expensive process by using fiber and something comfortable with everybody. All of us wear clothing. We're wrapped in it from the time we're born to the time that we meet our demise. And so the medium of cloth and nylon is this way of presenting transparent layered images like the holograms. And so that has been my latest rendition of these art pieces in that medium. I've also worked with metals and jewelry and other sculptural items. But this medium is readily accessible, and people are comfortable in looking at it, and so it has become my preferred medium.
Okay. What is the technique of holography and art?
Well, holography is layers of light that are surface refracted through angles, mirrors, and then it hits a surface that's concave and becomes an image. So the image in its different layers, a screen finally with all the layers. And so that is what has influenced my projection of using the cloth in that same kind of way to affect an image. Finally, as it comes, it then produces the effect that you might want to reveal.
Okay. I first want to say, because I want to back up, we were talking about Mom, you know, and how she's influenced you. I want to say, please, Artists of Color and myself want to please accept our condolences on the passing of Mom. I remember when she left us.
Yes.
And you put it on Facebook, I remember. But I wanted to publicly give you my condolences.
Well, thank you.
Because I remember seeing her in many places.
Yes.
You'd roll her in on, you know, in her wheelchair.
Yes.
And she'd have her knitting and crocheting with her, I remember.
Well, marked moments that we had together was that we shared an exhibit at the Museum of the National Center of African American Artists of our beadwork.
Yep.
And she was so thrilled to be exhibited as
wasn't she?
That was a moment of real pride. And she worked in her beads until she was 100 years old. And so, you know, we were really pleased and blessed to have her as a guide on the earth. And yeah, I'm humbled with that.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Absolutely. And I know she's still guiding you
Yeah.
today.
Teresa Frazier, Teresa
Yep,
Dooley Frazier is her
Teresa
name.
Frazier,
Yes.
absolutely. I just call her Mom
Okay.
because I remember Mom.
Yes.
I want to we're talking about calligraphy and art, and I don't want to get too far off the beaten path because
Absolutely.
there's so much I want to talk with you about, but we're going to take in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to see if you remember a process that you did back in 1990, I want to say 8 or 9, up in Fort Hill. It was a process that you did with some young people, and it was like not a windmill, but
okay.
I was there for that.
Oh, all right. Well, that was a commission that 12 artists in the city of Boston were commissioned to do to highlight the parks. And it was a sculptural project based on kinetic art. Art
Yes.
that moves in own either by the motion of the wind or by gears or some way that it moves. And so I was involved in that project, and I created a piece called Peace Flight that was a truncated pyramid. It was made 16 gauge steel and aluminum, and it talked to or spoke to the two-layered experience of the formation of the community in Roxbury in Fort Hill, and two ladders that spun around with the wind.
Yes.
And so as that was unveiled in Fort Hill, it then went to the Boston Commons for a year, like all of the other projects that were in the park and Hyde and other places, and then it came back to rest in Fort Hill. So that was an awarded piece by the city of Boston, and it was a fantastic work that was actually produced at Massed Art.
It was amazing because you talked about the different, the history in Roxbury and in the Fort Hill area, and I was just like sitting up front. I used to have that. I don't have them anymore, but that was I was really, I was really right in there. It was wonderful.
Yes.
It was really wonderful.
Well, it's
I
always
loved it.
wonderful to share with young people in the community.
Yes.
In fact, I don't think that we have a base for art to really operate unless it has a community and unless it has some conversation that reflects our growth and being and our existence. So the art that I've been enabled to do, I'm hopeful that it will always speak about community, about our issues, about success and triumph.
Yeah, I also noticed when I was
Excuse me.
doing a little research and history on you that you've done pieces with women. You work with the women's program in the city?
Yes. Well, recently I have become a part of a TAP project, Transformative Action Project under Northeastern's Public Health Institute.
Oh, okay.
And we had a session with women who are in the Women's Center in Cambridge doing haiku poetry and visual art to look at people who have some crisis-centered issues and looking at art engagement and mindfulness as a way to unlock some of who they are, not to scent violence that they may have experienced, but to look at art as a tool to open up their own public place and their own private places. So it was some of the work we did. But in terms of highlighting historic women, as a part of being with the Museum of African American History, there are women that I didn't know about that I found out about. For instance, Frances Ellen Walker, who was born in 1825, a free woman, born in Maryland, went to her uncle's school to be educated, became an activist and an abolitionist and a spokesman for the Pennsylvania anti-slavery. She lives until 1912, and
Really?
she is a women's suffragist who helps to ring in that 1919 moment of women being able to vote, and especially black women. She was extraordinary. She was an author. She was a literary artist. She published 50,000 of her own books. She was a friend to John Brown and his wife. And so I've done a quilt that is an image of her. She spoke in the African House in 1854, and then 1864, the newspaper carried her oratory. And so these are extraordinary women that we have not actually had the access to in our study of history and the narrative that exists, and that we have to unearth. And so I thought it was a great way to honor her in making an image of her. I'm an image maker, and I could do that. And my offer and honor to do that.
Well, we are going to go for a break right now, and we come back, and we're going to, because I want to talk to you about more about that.
Okay.
I was there when you did a session at the museum.
All right.
Messed up your son's haircut. You've messed up your son's haircut.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to Artists of Color. I am Elaine Hall-Corbin, your host. You saw me just a little bit off the beaten path for a minute there. That was because I was so enthralled in the artwork and talking to my guest, Frazier, who is with us this afternoon. Thank you again, for coming on. I've been waiting for this a long time. And, you know, when we left to go on break, we were talking about the history and women and, abolitionists and suffragists and women who've been educated back in the 18th century, in the early 1900s. I remember when you did a program at the Museum of the National Center, and you had pictures and highlighted women. Can you talk a little bit about just a couple of those women?
Sure. I think that we have not really explored the possibilities of how women in the 18th and 19th century, or women of color, operated. Yes. And it was our delight to uncover some of these women and present them to audiences that would normally not have access to their histories. So one of the women that we highlight lived right here in Boston on Joy Street, was previously from Hartford, Connecticut, and her name was Mariah Stewart. She was really functioning in the 1820s, 1830s in Boston, and you could really label her as one of our first black feminists that was a recognizable figure. She spoke and did oratory. She wrote. Dr. Marilyn Richardson has on her activities. She was a friend of an author, David Walker, who was an abolitionist who wrote Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World. They lived right next to each other on Joy Street, bottom of the hill that goes on to Cambridge. And she spoke in the African Meeting House, giving her farewell address, because it was not as acceptable for women to speak in front of not only mixed audiences, but to talk about issues that she raised. She believed in the might of people of color to raise themselves and to, not seek mediocrity, but to embrace unity to move forward. And she raised phrases like people of the sable hue, as
that
very
before.
eloquent language to follow. So she's one of that we highlight in the history of the Beacon Hill community
Yes.
and the early 18th and 19th century. And Phyllis Wheatley is another. Most of us have not known that Phyllis Wheatley was a member of an abolitionist committee called the Committee with Prince Hall and others, and she wrote letters to the Puritans about slavery and its ending and how it was unfair. We know about her poems on various subjects, religious and moral, that she published in 1773 as an anchor book for African American literary canon and actually the visual canon, because her next door neighbor, Scipio Moorhead, did the image that we have of her in that book. And he was an enslaved man when he did that. So it's an extraordinary canon of women who we plead with those who were contributing during the time that slavery was present in Massachusetts and in the country before and after the Civil War. One of them who was on Joy Street was Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler. She was the first African American woman physician who earned her medical degree from England Medical College in 1864. After the Civil War, she joins the Freedmen's Bureau and goes to help to work on people who were injured during the war. She also wrote 2 volumes of family and health issue and spoke to that. She resided in Hyde Park in her demise, but she grew gardens with herbal treatments and understood that mix orthodox medicine and traditional medicine together to get some of the best effects. So these are the kind of moments that we have to look at women in entrepreneurial pursuits, who had salons, who had professions very early on that we stand on the shoulders of now.
Yes.
And they were really pioneers in overcoming a lot of obstacles that were in front of them and set examples for us. So it is of great pleasure to talk with audiences about these women and how we add to that continuum of conversation and of effort.
Yes. Thank you, because I remember you doing that, that, at the museum. Matter of fact, I was right up front. I got pictures of you, and I got pictures of all the slides that you had up there, because they were so important. And I learned a lot that day. I learned a lot. I learned about women I'd never heard of. You always get the ones that you knew about.
Yes.
But then you get new ones that you don't know anything about. And that's a history.
Yes.
And it needs to be, it needs to be told.
Yes, and I think
And
that
I'm
we
glad
have a
you tell it.
responsibility. We have a responsibility to
Yes,
keep
we do.
telling the stories, to keep researching them further.
Yes.
Because I don't know we can ever know anyone well
Well
enough.
enough.
So as these moments continue, and most of these are ordinary people who do extraordinary things.
Thank you.
And they are people just like you and me, others who are in this audience, who are just doing the things that they do and try to do them well.
Yes.
And then history remembers them. So this is
And history
ongoing.
will remember you. So if I want to, about this piece that's sitting on the table, please tell me about this.
Well,
Or tell my audience about this. Because I'm looking at so many different, I couldn't begin to say where to begin.
okay. Well, I can help you.
Good. I'm glad.
So this piece is about Cape Town, South Africa. And this idea of reclaiming homes due to an act that's levied during the period of apartheid. There were 60,000 people moved out of their homes. This is a map of that District 6 in Cape Town as a layout where people who were living there, who were Black, who had their homes, were pushed out to the outskirts of Cape Town and resided in shanties. And so this portion is about the shanties. After the election of Nelson Mandela, you'll see that embroidery of him there.
Yes.
You have this action that the ANC was going to, the African National Congress was going to try to give the keys back to these people to re-people this area.
Oh.
And so the keys that are embroidered here were done on an embroidery machine as an technology at the Southern Technology Center. That's under the auspices of an innovation lab under MIT, started by Mel King on the South End. And this woman pictured here is looking at a vision of restoration, of looking forward. And so in restoring this. And so this conversation gets to be one of how people claim the homes that they lost or the land that they occupied and the space that geographically they once took up. And it's a big issue because there now is a Cape Town District 6 museum in
South Africa,
dedicated to this story where you can see poetry, you can see the map layout that is an entire floor of that area. And so this conversation is considered one that continues on the rights of people to occupy space and be honored in that right. So that's one of the kind of global issues some of my work speaks to.
Tell me about this piece in the back here.
This one has to do with my visit to Fields Corners Vietnamese Center.
There's a Vietnamese center in Fields Corners?
Yes, there is. There. It was a long while ago, about 10 years ago, that I went, and I was received in that center where they were actually elders there doing a weaving class. And I had taken weaving, and I was very interested in their mat weaving process. Okay. And so the bottom of that reflects that culture, their cultural kind of methodology in terms of weaving, but the tip is reminiscent of the Afro-Vietnamese that were there because of the Vietnam War. And there are still those who have survived and are still in Vietnam. And so this young Asian-looking woman is one of the people that I found in doing this research. Informing this piece is an experience of people of color who have not been honored in their own land, some of them were shipped here or flown here, and they began to reside with other families, and they have reunions every now and then. They go revisit the areas where they saw the helicopters land, where there were men who they didn't know, who were not from their culture, who were forming relationships with women who left them there in that particular space. And so when this was hung at Bunker Hill Community College, there was a student who had come through, and she was obviously telling me that she was from Vietnam, and that she says, you know, I love this work because nobody talks about it. Wow. And so that was a moment for me that kind of brought me to tears, that there were people who had experienced great disarray and great dissolution and great dishonor who now need to be raised. And so art is a way to be able to help restore that and give those messages out. We're all on this planet together, and in our connections. And so I find that these moments really help me as a human being to keep surviving and keep striving. Because we never know who we touch, who we will see, who will be honored, even be angered by
True.
something that we do. It's not always all positive, and that's real. But in working with real communities and real people and sharing real moments that are artistic and creative, we have some hope.
Yeah, we do. Because I've learned as I talk to different artists about their works that I truly believe that art is a way of, is a giver.
Yes, it is.
Because not only is it a message giver, it can heal, it can remove hate, it can remove anger, because you see different things, like this piece here. Your explanation of what all of this is about, made me, I never knew about the district in Cape Town. And so, I never knew what had happened there and how people had gotten displaced. But with your work and this piece, I get a feel for that and I get an understanding, I really do. And that's
Well, we just want to support people, places, and events that can make us either come closer or at least discuss and realize that we have tremendous opportunity to either ameliorate these things or further compound them. So,
yes. Yes.
So we hope that it is the amelioration and the support the solutions to these things rather than make negative strides. So I am hopeful as an image maker to join other artists who have been my mentors, people not even know they've been my mentors. I really appreciate those who have come before me in the Harlem Renaissance, who made a stand to use culture and art to progress the message of the African American experience, and in the Black Power era, as it was advancing through organizations like WUC and AfriCobra and other organizations that made that important as a way of survival of Black message. So, this is a real privilege of mine to participate this way.
It's amazing. It's an amazing way. I want to talk about this piece behind you about Martin Luther King.
Yes.
What
This
prompted
is called,
you?
Well,
I mean, we all know about Martin Luther King.
Oh, yes, we
but
do.
the way it's amazing. I want to know
Well,
every
I think
aspect.
Martin Luther King's life it was pregnant with so much work and so many words and so many speeches and so many people that he connected with, that what I tried to do to honor his life was to look at pivotal moments that really changed the course. Okay. And the two that this quilt highlights the March on Selma at the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Yes.
And the sanitation workers' strike.
Yep.
Selma, Alabama was the site of Bloody Sunday,
yes.
March the 7th, 1965, that was intended to be the initial part of a march to the state capitol in Montgomery. And we know some of this history. There's a recent movie that was made on Selma,
yes.
And featured our people like John Lewis, who was an icon of the civil rights movement, yes. and others. And I think in 2013, President Obama crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge to that 50th anniversary of Selma.
Oh.
So during this time, I was looking at what were pivotal moments in the civil rights movement, and with Martin Luther King. So the next event, the sanitation strike that happened in Memphis, and of course we know that what happened there became the result of of the sanitation workers not being treated fairly and demanding their rights. And one of the speeches of Martin Luther King that sends us to this mountaintop, this idea that things were taking a radical shift, is that moment. And he's unfortunately assassinated the next day. And so I thought that this was pivotal also to what becomes a continuum of voice and rapping out loud, which manifests itself in like the Black Lives Matter movement. So this this particular quilt talks to the effect of that. You can silence some tongues, 1,000 more will come. They will keep coming. And so it is called MLK, We Just Keep On Coming, which has to do with the target zone at the bottom. I have done a target series of targeted populations, be at risk or be a focus of. And this was a focus of those people who marched, who continue to protest, who have at the heart and the issue of freedom, justice, and equality, the mark of representing oneself. And so those are the people who continuously, even as we speak today, are looking at issues on them, are looking at the issue of food for everyone, ecology. We continue to have issue. And I thought that Martin Luther King was a drum major
to all the issues.
To all of that issue. And the perfection of looking at how nonviolent protests was a part of what he was advocating. Continuum in the meetings with Gandhi of the first Negro delegation to go there in 1936, and Howard Thurman, he and his wife being ones who met with Gandhi to discuss that, and then Martin Luther King to Boston University to study under the Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman. And that these are not accidents.
No,
it didn't, you know, it's a process.
And there's always a process.
Always a process.
There's
so
always a process.
This idea of civil disobedience with Henry David Thoreau in the times of early beginnings of America, this idea that became, I think, a genius sweep that Martin Luther King used the mass production of television to focus on how brutal some of what was happening was, but also on the numbers of people who were coming together, like the March on Washington and the March in Selma, and how we were looking at this ever-going process of reaching for freedom as it becomes elusive in our environment.
And as it's today,
Yes.
it's kind of going in that direction.
Well, it keeps going.
Yes, it doesn't
We'll
stop.
ever be in pursuit of real freedom, and as freedom becomes redefined, it's not a static kind of issue in the first place. So there will be those who have opposition to certain groups having freedom that other groups will then protest against, or some issue that's going to happen, and in the events, this is what we can expect. So that quilt is a part and parcel of that conversation.
We've got a couple of your pieces up here, and I wanted to talk about them.
Okay,
Let's beginning with this one.
This piece is, I was a Boston air artist, one of the first to receive a residency under the city of Boston to talk and collaborate with the Boston city departments. I chose the Department of Public Health, they chose me, and I worked with women who were in a residency called Entrefamilia, and I did a residency in poetry and quilt making with them, their children, and this was one of the quilts that the women produced.
Oh, really?
And so there is an exhibition at the First Church in Cambridge now that has the quilts and their poetry on display in Cambridge, Gardner Street. Yes, and so it will eventually go back to the Department of Public Health and be in the offices of people there. But it was an extraordinary experience with women who have issues with family, with the criminal justice system, but the creativity, as I always say, it's inside. It's in there, just like Prego spaghetti sauce. It's in there. The essence of what we are as human beings and the lifting up of their voices as citizens in Boston is what that project was about.
Okay, Citizens in Boston. And this one?
This one is a hologram, life-size hologram of two children who were in a magnet school for children with disabilities, or children who did not have, who had challenges in terms of language. And what you see here is one little boy, they were both 10 years old, and they were in a class together. The young girl is from Vietnam, and her partner there is Michael. He was challenged with cerebral palsy. And so he couldn't always communicate well.
I could see
and
that.
she became his interpreter. And so in the sound dome, that this hologram, you heard their story through her voice. And it was incredible.
Amazing.
Yeah. So the art of holography was used here as a tool to convey this message.
That is, oh my goodness. That is so beautiful. Just the thought.
In this quilt, this is a remake of a photograph of an African-American photographer who lived in Beacon Hill. And these two young girls are sisters called the Bell Sisters.
The Bell
Sisters.
Sisters.
Archived in the Museum of African American History's collection of photographs. I was able to look for photographs of children, and Herbert Collins and another photographer had these pictures that they had done. And what we don't really, I think we don't reckon with that photography was used by 1839.
Really?
And so this photograph is taken a little later in that century, but I just love that the way they seem to care for each other and are posed in this particular piece. And it is about being in their mother's garden. There were gardens in Beacon Hill that were there, and this particular piece is 7 feet tall. So from the image that may have been about 12, I was able to make a larger image and then do it entirely in fabric.
That's, whoa.
And so
it's beautiful.
And that is the image of Frances Ellen Warner that I was talking about
her.
earlier. It features the African Meeting House as a vignette of her story, and then her actions in black and white. You'll see a horse-drawn streetcar because precursor to Rosa Parks in wanting to integrate transportation, and she waged in 1857 a campaign for integration of the horse-drawn streetcars. And so she has poetry associated with that, and articles in newspapers in Philadelphia where she was active in that pursuit. So she looms large here, and that also is about 6 feet in length, and it comes from a photographer's photograph of her.
Now, is this done in, I meant to ask, is this a quilt or is, it is a quilt?
It's a quilt.
Okay.
It's done in fabric, totally in fabric.
Oh, wonderful.
It was just recently on view at the Cooper Gallery in Harvard in a show called 9 Moments from Now, which featured 140 images of African American art and was curated by Dale Hamilton. And I was really very happy to be in that company of others.
I know you were. Oh, amazing.
This one is I Matter. It is also part of the Target series. You'll see the Target featured, as you did see the Target in the piece with Martin Luther King, which continues that conversation of focused, targeted communities and what has. And I Matter is a statement of saying, not just experiment on me, but understand that my life is valuable.
Valuable.
I understand that. So this is an image that is to project that message.
Yes. Yeah, I do. We do matter.
We do matter.
We do matter.
This is a commission that I had at Wesleyan University to do a stage set, and so this is an entirely projected photo image onto fiber that covered a 30-foot by about 100-foot stage, where there was a collaboration of African-American composer, choreographer, historian, and artist to bring this story together on mapping and African-American community. That's a stage set. So my work goes from very small pieces to
very large
larger
pieces. Yes.
that are very challenging because
I can
you
imagine.
have fire regulations that the art has to withstand or undergo and then be inspected for. So I learn a lot in each process about what's
I'm sure
necessary.
In order for that to happen.
Yes.
Oh, goodness.
And
Well,
yeah,
we
with that
talked
piece,
about
we
that.
discussed that.
Yes, we did.
I am a man, but you also in that piece, Fannie Lou Hamer and
Oh,
her story,
yes.
and Stokely Carmichael and others who were prominent in the movement.
At that time.
Yes, and voting rights and challenging the legislature.
People don't realize. To me, our young people need so much teaching.
Well,
When you talk, I know they're working.
they're bright.
They're
and
getting there.
They're getting it.
They're getting it.
They're getting it.
You know, it's like, whoa. I did want to. And there's the target again.
Yes, the Target's another one of the Target series. This one is an ode to Michael Brown and the issue that happened there.
Yes.
You will see this as a watchman in his community, and the target here becomes the two kind of duplicity that's happening in his community there with the Ferguson police. If you looked at the theater box in one way, went to the other side, you would see girls jumping double dutch in that pleated box, theater box that I call it. And the cartographic renderings in the circles are about the redlining in our communities, the communities under inspection and experimentation. And the first one that you see next to the image of the young man is Upham's Corner. So this is about Black communities everywhere. And the second one is illustrative of the Showa textiles out of the Congo that mapped communities in early fabric language from the continent. So the piece that it took me quite a while to do this one. For instance, in the ear, you have about at least 20 pieces of fabric that are just in that ear. So you can imagine the layering that happens. It's very intricate in terms of stitching it together. But these are opportunities to tell stories.
Okay. Yeah. I actually want to, you have a piece that you read. I would love for you to do that.
Okay, as I do my work, I usually have not only visual art, but literary art that exists. And so just to give you some idea of a piece that I did, Nana's reflection rises in the water. Night creatures disappear into dark waters beside the bank. The water guide flows toward the stream. Only silence treads more steadily, finally to reach the tall grass at the river's edge. Nana longs to see herself in places of beauty where free skies sing mist around moon, like something dissolves in water. She stares, standing perfectly still, gazes at the flowing dark mirror of cloudy sky. Beneath the entire watery world, her ancestors live as spirits. Longs for the place where music transcends the rattle of bones. Longs to see herself past moments where babies are wrapped in flower petal blankets on far distant shores. Longs to see blue crystal sea, shattered water, without the mud cut, whisper her secret questions, only to hear her own voice answer. Pierce through lens where droplets of water on petals above her heart exaggerate cauldrons of her blood shed. Keeps rather than slice. Seeds become young, strong men under live oak trees, talking to other men about babies. Keeping this ending, she hurls the bowl toward the new rice, moist earth, scratches across, lies down upon it. A sweet breeze carries her thoughts from cause to cure. Healing wind is the air she breathes, beyond a mother and her baby. With first gray light morning, she, African, rises. Through fog, dawn erases midnight. Breeze settles gently into the riverbed, seen in the mercury of her watching eyes. That's Nana.
It sounds so, it's as if you're giving, to me it sounds like you're giving a, oh, I can't, the words I can't even put into that, because I see trials, tribulation, moving forward. I see going from place which is home and the freedom of home to being someplace that isn't freedom anymore. Mm-hmm. But you're trying to hold on to your child, your children. Mm-hmm. That's what I see.
Yes, and the healing.
Yes.
The healing of the wind and the breeze.
Yes.
Yes, it's in the nature. There are instances where we have dynamic poetry coming from other people, and one of the residencies is Home is Where I Am. And from that, a woman whose name is Laura Fauna wrote this: home is a circle as I stand in the middle of it and breathe.
And with that, I am going to thank you for being with me today, Lamerchi. And I want to thank my audience for listening. I know you've got many questions, but you can find Lamerchi. Just look her up. And I thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to the audience.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. I'm Elaine Hall-Corbin, your host, and this has been Artist of Color.